Hier ist unser Politikblog und die Sendung Macht und Menschenrechte, Power and Human Rights auf NetNews Radio. Wir sprechen mit Herrn Godfrey Blum. Er ist Abgeordneter für die UK Independence Party UKIP im Europaparlament. Er ist ehemaliger Logistikoffizier der gepanzerten Division der britischen Rheinarmee und ist Mitglied des Royal College of Defence Studies. Mr. Blum, what is your position on the Libya intervention?
Well, our view is that we think any form of intervention which isn't based on a sound plan is dangerous. Now, it seems to me, and I'm a member of the Royal College of Defence Studies, and I was at a seminar a few days ago where some of the top experts were saying and telling me that they didn't really know what might happen, how things might develop. They had no knowledge that it was going to come about in the way that it did. And I would argue that it's extremely dangerous when you commit military to any form of operation without a plan, and more importantly, without an exit strategy. And I think this is where we went wrong in Iraq. There was no plan, there was no exit strategy, and generally speaking, the problems became worse, and military intervention made the situation worse rather than better.
What is your information regarding the rebels at Libya? Are they Islamists or are they Democrats?
Well, we don't know. I mean, I've been dealing in London at the very highest level. And generally speaking, most of the questions, we don't have answers. We don't know who they are, who might be supporting them, what their ultimate political aim is. None of these things we know. And I think it's extremely difficult involving yourself in any military operation until you actually know what is happening. Even if you have good military intelligence and good political intelligence, things can easily go wrong. I think it's doubly dangerous when you don't know, and to use an English phrase here, I think we're flying blind.
The Taz newspaper, which is an ecologist newspaper, has reported on normal democratic Libyan families who are fighting on the side of the rebels, but also on killings against black-colored mercenaries on the side of Gaddafi, which have been killed by the rebels and have not been treated like the Geneva Convention prescribes this regarding prisoners of war.
Well, yes, of course. Again, this is an unknown, but of course the historical precedent for non-signatory members of the Geneva Convention, are great. And we know in the last conflict the Japanese were signatories to the Geneva Convention, and neither were the Russians. So this does produce problems of its own. But these are, generally speaking, secondary problems to committing a military force with no overall plan, no coordination, and no exit strategy. We feel that it's simply dangerous. I don't think we've made much progress in Afghanistan. We've made very little progress, I would argue, in Iraq. And here we are trying again, in spite of all the things that have gone wrong in the last 10 years, here we are involving ourselves again. And I think that's a mistake.
According to a recent report of the Versöhnungsbund, which is an NGO of the peace movement, regarding the total amount of the oil and gas exports of Libya, 40% is exported to Italy, 30% to Germany, 7% I think to Spain, but much less seems to be exported to France or to England. Might this be a reason that France and England are more ready to intervene than Germany and Italy?
I'm not quite sure why we feel that we need to intervene. Firstly, there is a glut of oil. There is no shortage of oil. So this can't possibly be considered any form of emergency situation. There is no desperate crying out global need at the moment for oil. It's largely being stored, mainly stored in tankers across the world. So we're not facing an oil shortage here. So there isn't a great global economic dynamic at play here. So why are the British and the French involving themselves to this extent? You've always got to look carefully at the political posturing. Whenever you find politicians perhaps in danger politically at home, the Prime Minister of England, even after only a year, is extremely unpopular. Sarkozy is unpopular and he's facing re-election. And that very often the way that political leaders try and deal with these things is to involve themselves in a military adventure to try and play the world's statesman. They think it might be good for domestic politics, and again I think that's a great danger too.
Not very long ago, there has been big discussion in the media regarding Euro-Med concept or Mediterranean Union. What do you think will become now of the possible Mediterranean Union after the start of this intervention?
Well, that was always a flawed concept anyway. The idea that you can get out a map of the world and draw a pencil mark round it and somehow think that people have something in common from an economic perspective or perhaps a cultural perspective is simply flawed. And this is one of the problems. Not only does the Mediterranean Union stillborn, it's the problems with the European Union. I would argue that economically and culturally, Germany has very little in common with the Iberian Peninsula. And of course, it's a question how long are the Germans prepared to pay for the economic eccentricities of the Mediterranean basin and the Iberian Peninsula. Already, Angela Merkel is suffering politically for committing German taxpayers' money in significant amounts to economic adventures which are clearly already being seen to fail.
One reason for this military intervention, which has at least the public been told, is to protect civilians. But now at least 3 experts from Germany, Tobias Pflüger, Frieder Wagner and Christoph Hörstel, say that there might have been, or that it seems that there has been used ammunition with depleted uranium at Libya. Do you have a position regarding weapons with depleted uranium?
I have no information on that, but let me make an observation, if I may. There has been a certain amount of political posturing in the European Union to say that the military intervention is to protect Libyan civilians. I would argue that this is disingenuous because we have seen the most appalling abuse across Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe, where the president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, is an equally evil and despotic murdering individual, and yet we haven't done anything about it. So the question is, if we're really worried about civilians being killed by African sadistic despots, why are we interested only in Libya, and why have we allowed Mugabe to hold his reign of terror in Zimbabwe for so long? It's intellectually disingenuous. It's hypocrisy of the first water. I don't think you can play this game that one bad man, you do something about, and another bad man you don't. And I think it's reflective of, sadly, of modern day politics, the dishonesty of our politicians to the people who they are supposed to be looking out for their interests.
Not long ago, Europe has detained many refugees, not only to the peaceful Mauritania, but also to Libya, where at least refugees from Somalia and Eritrea have been tortured, according to information from refugee organizations. How could Europe change its policy regarding refugees and Libya?
Well, of course, whenever you get a refugee problem, you find that there's a very significant amount of refugees who are economic refugees. And this is something that Western Europe is suffering from at the moment, especially in the United Kingdom, where there are thousands and thousands of people who are claiming to be refugees. And in point of fact, they're not refugees at all. What they're actually looking for is the benefits that a Western democratic society offers them, which I can understand. But of course, the indigenous population, and they're suffering greatly from Tunisian refugees now in southern Italy, one has to be firm. One has to be firm in these matters, I'm afraid. And it's simply something that the Western democracies cannot absorb. We cannot absorb unlimited numbers of refugees, be they economic or not.
I understand. But what shall we... many refugees have been detained to Libya who have not ever come from Libya. What shall now happen with these people which before the intervention would have been detained to Libya? How shall Europe go on with these people who are not really refugees because they have been chased, but because of economical reasons? Then it's now not possible to send them to Libya at the moment.
Yes, I mean this is a worldwide phenomenon. This is a worldwide phenomenon, isn't it? Something that Europe is suffering from, something that North America is suffering from. The problem that we have, one wants to be helpful, one wants to be philanthropic, one wants to perhaps, even if one isn't Christian, use Christian values of compassion and help. However, we must bear in mind that a lot of the Western democracies are very deeply in debt. Italy, Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Greece, Ireland are all very, very deeply in debt. And we have to ask our governments, democratically elected governments, that their first responsibility is their own population. And so therefore, the German government's first responsibility is to the German people, and the English government is to the English. And I'm sorry that sometimes it sounds hard, but you have to be cruel to be kind. The United Kingdom, for example, is simply full. There is really no room for more thousands and thousands dependent refugees. They can't be absorbed. They must be sent back.
Sent back to your home country, to their home countries, not to Libya.
They must go back from wherever to the country where they were born. So if they're Tunisian and they are now in Italy, they must be sent back to Tunisia. If they're Libyans, they must be sent back to Libya. It is not the fault of the Italians, the British or the Germans that these people are fighting amongst themselves. I'm very sorry, and it's very sad. But we have to draw a line under whose responsibility that is. You cannot ask people who are extremely poor in Western Europe, living on small pensions. In my constituency in Yorkshire, I have people living on only £98 a week. They're trying to live on £98 a week. I simply don't think it's fair to ask them to pay for refugees in other parts of the world. It just isn't fair.
Do you have an idea how much the Libya intervention might cost the British taxpayer?
Well, it's already costing a fortune. Just mounting these airstrikes which are coming in from Norfolk with refueling, air refueling, so on and so forth, is already running into millions of pounds. And it's millions of pounds that we simply don't have. The Libyan problem is not our problem. The Libyan problem eventually must be solved by the Libyan people, and it will have to run its course. We can't go on and on being the world's policeman. Every time something nasty happens in the world, it's always the poor people that suffer, not the rich people. Rich people don't feel the draft. Rich people in Germany and the United Kingdom, my Prime Minister, David Cameron, is a rich man. He belongs to a very rich family. He married into a very rich family. It's these sort of people who make these decisions, but it doesn't affect them. They don't go hungry. They can always afford petrol in the car. They've always got a new car. They've always got holidays. They do very nicely. It's the poor people in our communities that we need to start concerning ourselves with.
Many thanks.